If you haven't voted yet, Election Day is tomorrow. Find your local voting location, go there and try to vote. If you're not registered, go anyway and see if they'll let you vote. Try multiple precincts if you have to. If you're in California, then literally just go vote wherever and whenever you want. Vote early, vote often. Of course, always obey the law. I would never ever condone any kind of voter fraud. I want to make that clear. I am not saying that if you live in California to vote multiple times because they really have no way of stopping that and they don't ask for ID, and you can point to any name in the book and just say that's you. Do not do that. Do not go to multiple polling stations and point to names in the book and vote multiple times. That is illegal. Do not do that.
Because people failed to accept and explore the alternative hypothesis, which turned out to be factually correct.
This coming showdown on birthright citizenship is just a symptom of the general escalation of the struggle. Looking at Trump right now, it's like a dream. 4 years ago, people like me, not just me, were in the wilderness begging the Republican Party and conservative movement to fight. Looking at the demographic data within the United States, I was saying, Republicans, you have victory if you just take it. It's right in front of you. Just close the borders. It's this simple. Close the border, you will have everything. Keep the border open, you will have nothing. This whole problem could have been solved under Reagan, but Reagan refused. Reagan stuck up his nose and refused to deal with the first problem and the premier enemy facing this country. Not the Soviet Union, but mass immigration. Reagan was one of the short-sighted and venal people who got suckered into this Soviet menace narrative, and we're paying the price today for that. People like Pat Buchanan were saying to stop the free market madness, stop the free trade madness, stop the militarism, stop the open borders madness. To put these things into a single bin, stop the globalist madness. All of these things are ripping the country to shreds. Trump gets in, and it's taken time for him to get his feet under him. He hired a lot of clever guys into his administration when what he needed was loyal ideologues that would go to the barricades for him. And I think now Trump is starting to get it, or at least it seems to me that he's getting it. Let me show you something here that I found very heartening. Donald Trump has placed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and washing machines. Now, for washing machines, Whirlpool is the largest washing machine producer in the United States, and here's a map of their locations. Ohio, 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 Michigan, Iowa. He put tariffs on aluminum and steel. Well, guess where aluminum and steel is produced? Here's a map of the proportion of the population involved in primary metal production, primarily aluminum and steel. Reward your friends, punish your enemies. California is never going to vote for you. This gives you some flexibility. Make policy that will make Minnesota vote for you and keep Michigan and Pennsylvania voting for you. California and the northeastern states can go suck a turd. Another great move that Trump did was reducing the state and local tax deductions, or SALT deductions, that individuals could deduct against their federal income tax. The cap was lowered to $10,000, which means high income earners in Republican states, which have fairly low state taxes, would be unaffected. But if you're rich and in a Democrat state, well then Trump just raised your taxes a lot. In effect, Trump figured out a way to raise taxes on New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, Maryland, Rhode Island, and Vermont, while lowering taxes on the rest of the country. And since none of those states that I just listed off matter, it won't hurt Trump in the Electoral College. Moreover, within states, people in urban areas have higher nominal incomes, even if they don't actually have a higher standard of living. What's the price of a bottle of water in New York City or even Boston versus a price of bottled water in Wichita? And the difference in rent is just brutal between urban and rural areas. But taxes aren't assessed on a cost of living adjusted income. They're assessed on nominal income. Even within, say, California, Californians in rural areas have lower incomes and thus pay lower taxes, and so Trump's SALT reductions are less likely to hurt rural house districts within California, for example. Now, you may have some moral qualms with this. Look, These are the assholes who put in place regulations specifically designed to destroy the coal industry in the US. And these are the people who want to turn the United States into Venezuela, both in terms of demographics and government policy. And a sizable proportion, perhaps around a third, literally hate you because you are white. Don't waste any empathy on them because they have none for you. Now, these tariffs here are probably bad for the country as a whole, but hot take, nobody with an IQ above 115 cares about the country as a whole anymore. I'm a bit leery about tariffs on something as low in the production chain as steel and aluminum. You generally want to put tariffs on manufactured goods, but the country as a whole includes places like California and New York, so a lot of the pain from the tariffs are going to be absorbed by states that will never vote for Trump. So let's say the tariffs have 40% gain, 60% pain for the US as a whole. This can still be beneficial because half or more of the pain gets felt by Democrat states like California and New York, while all of the gain goes towards these volatile Rust Belt swing states. Since California and New York were never going to vote Trump anyway, who cares? Some of the pain will be felt by the South and the far West, but Trump, I think correctly, considers that worth it, as for the time being, the South and the far West is solid. In addition, the indirect steel usage per capita is probably higher in urban than rural areas. So even say within Texas, the pain is being felt more by Houston than by Lubbock. And Houston doesn't matter, Lubbock does. So I'm a big fan of the SALT reductions. I'm less of a fan of the tariffs in and of themselves. But what I'm excited about both of these things is the mentality that they reveal. They reveal that we finally have a serious political fighter. National Review mocked this in 2016, calling it the peak he fights. Yes, this is what fighting looks like. Reward your friends, punish your enemies, and give the squeaky wheels the grease. Jeff Sessions, for example, could be improved upon. He needs to just be suing everyone. But he's doing a great job going into states and deporting some people who are there and reducing the number of Democrat voters on the rolls. Getting them off the rolls. Legal, illegal, I don't care. Just find ways to get Democrats off the rolls and away from the polls. If he knocks a few Democrats off the rolls who, according to the law, should not have been knocked off, good. These are our enemies. They want to drive us into the dirt. They hate you because you are white. We don't want them voting. Period. And adding more steps that reduces Democrat voters more than Republican voters is a good thing. If making people fill out just some stupid form or required to get just another dumb kind of ID, if that costs Democrats 10,000 votes but only costs Republicans 5,000 votes, that's a net gain. Do it. Now, I would like to see Trump ban the lying press from the White House and give media access exclusively to outlets like Western Journalism, Breitbart, Fox News, One American News Network, and Newsmax. And so if people want to know what's going on in the White House, they have to get it from those sources. No more scoops for the lying New York Times. On top of that, start investigating quote-unquote media companies and start suing them for libel and slander. Start suing them in the UK if you can, because the UK has more favorable libel and slander laws. As for the government, you have infinite money, while the resources of these media companies are very limited. So even if you lose every single case against CNN, you're delivering financial body blows against them. Or if CNN starts getting money from rich Democrats, that's fine. That's less money for Democrat candidates. Even if you don't eradicate CNN as an entity, which is what we're shooting for, you can still bleed that side of the political spectrum with exorbitant legal costs. The problem, of course, is Jeff Sessions. He doesn't think this way. Jeff Sessions, bless his heart, is doing some good work on immigration and purging the voter rolls in states of potential Democrat voters. But Jeff has said on several occasions that he will not use the Department of Justice as a weapon against his enemies. And this is precisely the mentality that has to fucking go. This is constitutionalist horseshit. Because here's how my Constitution actually works. Our enemies don't care about the Constitution. They do whatever they want, and if the Constitution says otherwise, well then they'll just say the Constitution is a living document and needs to evolve. They just say, in a sense, that the Constitution is wrong for the values of the current year, which are, of course, defined by them. And they've managed to con this whole country into thinking this living document farce is actually a legitimate position. One to be considered that it's anything other than them just not wanting to follow the rules. But if we try to do anything that could possibly be construed as unconstitutional, then suddenly these people become strict literalists on the Constitution. As soon as birthright citizenship comes up, suddenly these living document people become absolute textualists, and author's intent goes right out the window. What keeps them in check, what prevents them from turning this country into Puerto Rico, is Republicans winning, Trumpists winning and rolling back their agenda and advancing our own. At least that is all that can possibly keep them in check. The Constitution does nothing because they don't care about. Some of our guys care about the Constitution. That's it. And because only our guys care about the Constitution is only effective as a weapon against us. In much the same way that the Bible is only effective as a weapon against Christians. When I hear some guy is a staunch constitutionalist, oh, this is a great guy, he's a real firm believer in the Constitution, I just think, oh boy. Here we have another asshole who's going to tell me how fighting back is unconstitutional. That's all that means. We're going to try to fight back. He's going to say, no, fighting back is unconstitutional. And then he's going to go on CNN and they're going to tell him how great he is for standing on principle. How John Roberts kept the Affordable Care Act alive. I'm sure Roberts found some inane little hook in the minutiae and felt so good about himself, felt so clever to hand those who want white men like him dispossessed a victory. And I don't want any of this spurgy garbage about how bad the Republican Party is. I know. I lived the past 10 years as well. I lived the George Bush years, the John McCain years, the Dennis Prager years as well. Yes, lots of problems. But you have now Tucker on PragerU. Yes, PragerU is now talking about how the Democrat Party is using mass immigration to gain power, and shows evidence that they know it makes Americans' lives worse off, but they don't care because mass immigration means more Democrat votes, which means more power for them. Guys, 4 or 5 years ago, this stuff that's being put in like a info cartoon on PragerU, this was purely a white nationalist talking point. Republicans wouldn't touch this narrative with a 10-foot pole. They were still babbling about how they were going to get the Hispanic vote. John McCain is dead, may he rot in hell, and Lindsey Graham seems to have been infused with a little bit of a spine as a result. And he kind of has his own little thing going on. Call me Lindsey. I'll call you he whose finger is in the wind. What you're doing now, Lindsey, is nice, but it remains to be seen if you'll go to the barricades when the time comes, or if you just go wherever the wind blows. McConnell the war turtle has gotten on board the Trump agenda. Conservative media is now dominated by Rush Limbaugh, who is a hop, skip, and a jump away from a full-on white nationalist. Jeffrey Tucker, much the same. Bill O'Reilly, after leaving Fox, has seriously gotten woke and is constantly talking about the war on white people. Glenn Beck is not quite as far as that, but he's now on the closed borders nationalism Trump train. And they're fighting. And based on the early voting data, it looks like this embrace of the N-word, nationalism, sending troops to the border, making immigration the number one issue on voters' minds, is working. It's not the economy stupid, it's immigration stupid, because immigration is much lower on the hierarchy of survival. It's basic safety and basic existence. Don't count your chickens yet, and be sure to vote on election day. Vote early, vote often. And one thing I want to point out is that it seems that pollsters have learned from 2016 that primary turnout matters. And everyone kept saying that Democrat primary turnout was higher for House races, but that was entirely an artifact of the Democrats having more contested House races. If you were to just look at the contested House races, Republicans actually had higher primary turnout per contested House race. And the early voting data here just speaks for itself. Now look, Republicans being up in early voting from where they were in 2016 doesn't mean they'll be up by election day or even have more votes on election day. If Republicans do even end up with more votes, it won't necessarily translate to more House seats either. The Republicans are almost certainly going to lose House seats, may even lose the House, though the prediction markets have moved towards Republicans keeping the House. But here's something I will note. In 2016, the polls were generally correct for most of the country. The polls were wrong in the Rust Belt region. They were wrong in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. They also underestimated the margins by which Trump would win in Indiana and West Virginia, but those are not swing states, so those don't really matter. Nobody really cared about those states. Don't forget that the polls generally had it right in Nevada. Don't forget the polls generally had it right in Colorado. In western states especially, the polls were dead on. Doesn't mean they'll be dead on again, but just when you make predictions that deviate from the polls, you do so at your peril. So people who sneer at polls in general because of the 2016 election, you learned the wrong lesson. Polls are a tool. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's inappropriate. You have to look at the poll, and it can be useful as a predictor, but through a glass darkly. The pollsters missed a Trump phenomenon in the Rust Belt. That's it. And if you go back to my articles on the Alternative Hypothesis website, that's what I was telling people in October back then. Trump's going to win Pennsylvania, and he's just going to steamroll Ohio. My analysis also put Michigan at 0 at a true toss-up, as in Michigan was a total toss-up, because I was thinking, no way, it's Michigan, so I didn't predict Trump to win Michigan. If I had trusted my data more fully, I would have said Michigan is a true toss-up. And I predicted the Rust Belt turnout based on the high primary turnout in those states. This massive Republican primary turnout did not occur in Virginia or Florida. And in Virginia and Florida, the polls were accurate. Back in 2016, all of the pollsters ignored primary turnout, which is why their party ID weightings were so far off in the Rust Belt. This time, however, we may be looking at polls being off and around 20 states, not just 6. For example, in Arizona, you have polls saying it's dead heat between McSally and the other person, Sinema or something. Meanwhile, in early voting, McSally is doing better than Trump was in 2016. And Trump won Arizona by 3.55% in 2016. If this pace holds, we may be looking at McSally winning by 6 or 7 points based off 2016. Of course, there's no point in getting hopes up too high, but I'll say in superposition that it looks like Trump is finally doing what Pat Buchanan was shouting at the Republicans to do for 30 years, and the fruits of this strategy appear to be victories. And increasingly, a lot of white nationalist criticisms of the Republican Party are being made obsolete. I mean, let's break it down. Immigration is their number one issue. They're sending troops to the border. They want to build a wall. They want to end birthright citizenship. It's a terrible fight to get these things done, but we finally have a faction, now a majority faction within the Republican Party at least, that wants to do it. And if you want to talk about race realism, well, it's not an issue that the Republican Party has taken an overt stance on or really emphasizes, but there's certainly a lot of them like Charles Murray and our good old friend Bill Kristol who appear to buy into race realism. And I don't think Trump supporters would be massively resistant to the idea if it was pitched to them. You know, a lot of white nationalists say we gotta fight the Jews. Now, look, you shouldn't be anti any specific racial or ethnic group, but in fact, white Republicans are generally opposed to the financial, insurance, and real estate sector, or FIRE sector. They're opposed to financial speculators. They're opposed to the media and Hollywood. They're opposed to the political party bosses. They hate lawyers and are increasingly skeptical of judges. They're opposed to getting involved in any wars in the Middle East going forward. Whether or not they know these wars were generally done at the behest of Israel is irrelevant, because Republican voters now oppose going there anyway. The fact that they're not aware that it was Israel that got them into those wars previously is immaterial. They're opposed to the war. Like, what more do you want? The only thing Republican voters aren't doing at this point is literally naming the Jew and being overtly anti-Semitic, something which there is no point in doing because it alienates potential Jewish and non-Jewish supporters. In terms of segregation and racial hygiene, well, whites in general are the least likely of any race to breed out, and conservative whites are almost certainly less than the average. Of course, it's not 100%, but you have an accepted norm among conservative families not to let your daughters date thugs. Okay, well, what does thug mean most of the time? When shitlibs say the GOP is becoming a kind of de facto white nationalist party, I think that's still wrong, but it's certainly more true now than it's ever been in my lifetime. And the kinds of people who vote for the Republican Party are starting to approach the racial demographics of the first world strain, i.e. about 75% white and closer to 80% European by total genetic admixture. The alt-right is in smoking ruins, but in a sense, the alt-right has had its way. And the truth that most white people in the US are open to quasi-white nationalist ideas appears to be playing out in both the expansion of the Republican Party among whites and the conversion of the Republican Party into a quasi-white nationalist party. If I could be so precocious, the Republican Party is moving in the direction of my personal beliefs. The only real difference being that I recognize a hereditary basis to the behavior and see the world in these messy clusters of races, and within these clusters of races are odds ratios of passing some threshold of behavior that matches a first world standard, quote unquote. The Republican Party, even without an explicit hereditary policy, is in effect cobbling together a political coalition with a similar racial makeup as what you would expect from my first worldist immigration policy if King Ryan ruled the world. And for all you white nationalists saying first worldist sounds cringy, first off, things sound more cringy when I say them because of my nasal voice, and I have a uniquely nasal voice because I have a deviated septum. Second off, I've done A/B testing on Facebook with normie conservatives, and they love first worldists, and they love calling their enemies third worldists. And the opinion of normie conservatives matters. The opinion of white nationalists don't matter. So find it cringy all you want. I don't care. And neither should you. The Trump presidency is like a dream come true. He's increasingly becoming my president, doing what I and many others have been praying for the Republican Party to do. And it's winning, it's working, just like we said it would, even as this nationalist strategy is being implemented far later than we wanted. Imagine if this was done in the 2000s instead of 2016, but better late than never. We can thank that evil son of a bitch George Bush for this late implementation. I think Trump has learned that embracing the Republican Party as the European American Workers' Party wins, and that cucking on these things scores you 0 points with third worldists. Increasingly, he's just not needing to compromise with the Paul Ryan wing anymore, and that's really it now. Who are the big cucks anymore? Mitt Romney? Maybe he'll just be one senator. Glenn Beck? Not anymore. Not even Dennis Prager is really vocal about being an open borders fiscal conservative anymore. McCain's literally dead. Lindsey has bent the knee. Ted Cruz was always kind of a Trumpist, even if circumstance pitted him against Trump. Now is not the time to try to hold on to the smoking rubble that is the alt-right, something which was never properly defined, was hijacked by publicity-hungry narcissists and run into the ground, and instead promote the living tissue of the Trump Reformation. Election day is tomorrow. If you haven't voted, or maybe even if you have, who knows, you can go down to the polling places for some reason. And be sure to vote early, vote often.